What's up folks, Mike here, Running Watches. Welcome to the video, and today's video is something that's been knocking around in my head for a little while, so I thought I would share my opinion, my views, my thoughts on it. And it's a question that I see quite a lot online, and it's a question I get asked quite a lot by email and over the phone by various different customers over the years. And I've seen some right answers and some sort of wrong answers, and somewhere in between online and everywhere else when it comes to how often should you service your watch. So we're going to break the video down into a couple of sections, and I don't want it to be too long-winded. I know I can waffle on for quite some period, and that's enough to make anyone go to sleep, including myself. So I'm going to try and be to the point, but also cover some of the points that I think are kind of important. So the first point I wanted to touch on was what a service means. Now, depending on where you're from, how you're raised, and everything like that, different things and different sayings and different words can have different meanings to all different people. And it's not just to do with watch servicing, it's to do with any kind of thing. So to have your watch serviced is a bit like asking to have your car serviced. Depending on which garage you take it to, depends on what kind of service they're going to provide. The same kind of applies to having your watch serviced. So if you're going to take your watch to the local high street, say here in the UK, you take it to Timpson's and you say, well, I would like my watch serviced. It's probably not going to mean the same thing if you took that watch to a independent watchmaker like myself or others that are like me. And again, it'll be very much different if you sent the watch back to the manufacturer and you asked for it to be comprehensively serviced as well. So the same watch could be treated three different ways by three different places with three very different minded type people. So I would say, I'm not going to say that the high street doesn't care, but in general, they're mostly out for just profit and they don't really care that much. But that's just my personal opinion and my experience. Independent watchmakers are, I would say, probably the better of the three in most cases, not in all cases. And I know I would say that because I am one, but from all the private, individual or independent watchmakers that I know of, most of us really enjoy our job. We really have a passion for what we do and we really care. So I think that plays a huge role and a huge factor when it comes to servicing a watch. I think that's important. It's not the utmost importance above everything else, but it is certainly something I would consider to be important. If you send your watch back to the manufacturer, again, you would think that the manufacturer would care as much as an independent, but that's not always the case. And at the end of the day, they are a business, and their business is to sell watches and also make money from the return and repair of said watches that they've already sold. And that's very prominent in the case of quite a lot of the high-end Swiss manufacturers. I'm not going to name names, but they do like to make more money on the return and repair of watches than they do on the actual sale of watches themselves. So whilst they can have some of your interests at heart, I wouldn't say they have all of your interests at heart. So when you say, or when people ask, I want a watch serviced, you have to be kind of careful what that actually means by what kind of service you're going to get. So if you are going to get your watch serviced, I would always recommend looking out for a small independent watchmaker like myself or others that are like me. There are plenty of us around, and if you can find a good one, then by all means keep hold of them, because they are like gold dust nowadays. I know it sounds weird for me to say that when I am one myself, but I think it's certainly true. So the next point I wanted to make about servicing is between the different types of watch that you could potentially own. Now, there are quartz watches and there are mechanical watches, and there are many divisions of those kinds of watches. You have the cheap throwaway watches that you get in the supermarket that are like £10. We're not really talking about that, but there are higher end Swiss or Japanese quartz watches that are very serviceable movements. The movements can be broken down into parts, and it's often overlooked with quartz watches that they're not serviceable. And although there are a lot of quartz movements that are non-serviceable, there are also far more that are serviceable, and they're often overlooked because people don't think of them as mechanical things, because they're electronic, and we live in an electronic age, and the mechanical aspect of a quartz movement is, I don't know, it seems to disappear with most people's thoughts. So, but that's not actually true. If you own a half decent Swiss quartz watch, there's a very, very good chance that it's a very serviceable movement. So, just like a mechanical watch, they're worth taking care of. Mechanical watches would seem an obvious thing to have service, but again, all different people from all different walks of life, not always understanding that a mechanical watch needs servicing, but they do. Probably a bit more so than quartz watches. Quartz watches can go for probably a little bit longer period between servicing when compared to mechanical watches. But both, I would say, are of equal importance. And the reason I say both is, just to give an example, you can have a Omega Seamaster mechanical watch, and you can have an Omega Seamaster quartz watch, and both of them are fully serviceable watches. Both of them have mechanical components and require lubrication and checks and gaskets and water tests and all those sort of things. But more often than not, I will see the quartz Seamasters come in absolute disrepair because they didn't realise that it needed or could be done. So that's one of those aspects there. And when it comes to mechanical watches, how often should you service them? That's one of the biggest questions I've seen online, and it varies. I'd like to say that there is an absolute definitive answer. There's an answer that I would have personally for each of the different options. But people say, oh, you need to have your watch serviced every 3 years without fail, and that's that. And I don't think it is as clear cut as that, because you're dismissing a lot of factors that come into play. So with mechanical watches, the various factors that come into play would be the complexity of the watch. So the more complex the watch becomes, then the more often it should be serviced. The same with almost any mechanical machine, really, cars as well. So if you take a Mini and then you take a Bentley, then a Bentley would certainly require much more level of detail of servicing. There's much more parts to it than a Mini, for example. So you could have a simple manual wind watch, and then you'd have, I don't know, a triple register chronograph with date function and a reserve or something like that. They're two very different beasts in terms of mechanics. And one requires far more attention than the other. One requires far more points of oiling than the other. So the simple manual wind watch could probably run for 2 to 3 years longer without any intervention when compared to something that is much more complex. So how often should you service your watch? That is one of the factors. How complex is your watch? The next factor along from that would be how often do you wear or use that watch? Now, if you're a person that wears that watch every single day, then the interval between services should be reduced, because it's going to wear out. It's going to be in constant use. It's going to be constantly in contact with your body. It's going to be warmed up. It's going to cool down at night when it's taken off. It's going to be near humidity. It's going to be taken somewhere dry. The environment that watch lives in is going to be constantly changing, whereas a watch that's worn infrequently, taken out for dressy nights out and things like that, and then put away in a box for months on end, that's not going to see as much time, and is going to stay in a fairly steady state. So there are lots of factors floating about with regards to how often you should service your watch. But to break it down to the most simplest terms, is the first term is, what type of watch do you have? Is it quartz or is it mechanical? If it's quartz, I would say you should have your watch serviced, or at least checked up or checked over, and see if it requires a service, every 3 to 5 years. Possibly longer, depends on the model. But it never hurts to say, I'd like the battery changed, I'd like it just to be checked over, and get that done every 3 to 5 years. I mean, the battery is going to be exchanged before that in most cases, but there are some watches that run for up to 10 years without a battery change. So 3 to 5 years for quartz watches. With mechanical watches, anything that's manual wind, I would say you could easily leave for 5 to 6 years between service intervals. Automatic watches, with or without a date complication, most standard automatic watches, you could probably easily run for 5 to 6 years between service intervals. Probably less if you wear that watch every single day. Then I would drop that down to 3 or 4 years. Anything that is more complicated than a automatic with day or with a day date or no day date complication, if you have something that's a chronograph, for example, a 7750 or an NE88 Seiko chronograph, then I would say you would be looking at least every 3 to 4 years that you have that watch checked over to see if it requires a service. And the watchmaker will kind of know if it needs a service or not. They'll be able to say, well, actually, I think it can probably run another 18 months before it needs something else. So if you've got a good, honest watchmaker, they'll say to you, no, it doesn't need a service yet. It'll be fine for another 18 months. Then yeah. So obviously, the more complicated your watch becomes, if you have something that's a Patek Philippe or a Jaeger LeCoultre with a tourbillon cage, anything like that, if you have anything that's super complicated, then you'll have to have that watch checked even more regular. I would say every 3 years with something as complicated as that. And that's basically the gist of it. You just have to sit down, not even sit down, you just have to, you don't need to sit down and think about it. You can stand up and think about it, of course. You just have to think about it logically. What kind of watch do I have? I've got a quartz watch, I've got a mechanical watch. Okay, well, my mechanical watch, how complicated is it? Well, this one's not that complicated, doesn't have that many moving parts. I can leave that for 5 to 6 years, or as soon as I see the performance drop to less than what I'd like, then I'll take it and get it serviced. Or I've got quite a complicated watch here and it's quite expensive. I want to take care of that and make sure that it provides me a good service. I'm going to take that to be checked every 3 to 4 years. And it never hurts at any point to have your watch evaluated and checked by a watchmaker. Most watchmakers are quite honest and they say, you know what, this watch is perfectly fine, there's no need for me to intervene here just yet, but bring it back to me in 6 months, 2 years, or whatever time frame it might be, and it will need that attention there and then. I'd say you'd find with most independent watchmakers, unlike the larger manufacturers who'd be happy to take your watch at any point, even if you've just bought it, to make the money off you, the watchmaker knows that if they provide a good service, that watch will come back to them anyway. Sounds kind of funny, but it's kind of true for quite a lot of watchmakers. Yeah, so that's pretty much it. It's been rattling around in my head. I hope I haven't dragged on too long. I've kind of made the points that I want to make. But the basic rundown, too long didn't read kind of situation is, if you have a watch, get it checked every 3 to 6 years, and you'll be golden. But yeah, if it's a question in your head, how often do I need to service these watches or my watches? Just think about it logically. A lot of people don't think watches need servicing, and they think it's all a big myth. I have people that come to me and say, oh, my watch hasn't been serviced in 20, 30 years. And I say to them, well, yes, it shows, because it's broken, it's worn out, it's going to cost an absolute bomb to repair because it's been there so long. But yet these people will take their cars to be serviced every single year. So different strokes for different folks, but there we go. So I'm not going to rattle on about all of that. But anyway, I hope this little video has been helpful to someone out there. If it hasn't, oh well, you've just lost 14 minutes of your time, but don't worry about it. If it has been helpful, then give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, leave your comments below. I can't promise I can reply to every comment, but I try to if I can. And I'll be back with more videos, watch related or possibly machine related, depending if I'm doing any work on the lathe, etc, etc. And if you like watch related videos, then do check out the other videos on my channel. But until then, take care and have fun.